Micah, are you reading poetry in the tree again?
Okay, in today's video, you're going to hear from a couple different people on how they recommend reading a poem. We're going to listen to them read a poem, and then you're going to hear their initial reactions to the poem. At the end, I'm going to wrap it up with a few of my own thoughts along with some poetry terms that you need to be thinking about. And then I'm going to leave you with a question that I want you to answer in the comments below. So let's go ahead and jump right into how other people read poetry.
So when I sit down to read a poem, usually first go around, I just read it. I just, for what it is, take in, try and not think about it too much. Just kind of read it and have base thoughts over, I think it's probably talking about this or about that, or, and then I will go in, I'll read it again, I'll highlight different, I'll highlight punctuation. It's really important it's something that I did for a really long time that really messed up how I viewed poetry, was I would read it line to line instead of reading it punctuation to punctuation mark. And so it really messes up the flow, and so I'll make sure to circle punctuation so that I can read it the way that the poet intended it to be read. And I will look for, next I kind of look for devices. So things that stick out to me, like alliteration or symbolism, and I'll mark those things. So this was imagery, this was personification, this was those things. I'll write questions on it, probably the second or third time, I don't understand what this means. What are they trying to get at? Could this mean this? Could this mean this? So I just really try and mark up the poem, but every word in poetry is important. Good poets capitalize on every word that they use, and so I try and pay attention to the word choices, to what they're saying, how does that connect with other words, what are the images that they're that they're painting, what could be the overall theme, what is something that reoccurs, are there some, is it light, is it dark, is it, what are they saying about these different things. So that's usually kind of how I go about it.
One way to understand a poem I've learned is to look at the title, and that should give you a huge clue as to what the poem is about. And I've learned that the process that I go through, I have to go through a very extensive process because I have to read it and then I have to reread it. I guess it just depends if the poem automatically grabs my attention. I don't have to read it or reread it as many times. But I like to break it down. I like to look at every line and try to see if there's a deeper meaning in each line. I like when authors use, or poets use metaphors. I love metaphors and analogies. They're my favorite because it allows you to think deeper and connect one thing to another,
So when I'm reading a poem, I try to focus on a broad question of, okay, what is this poet trying to say about life, about the human experience? And there are a couple ways that, depending on the poem, help me to kind of come to that. So it might be evident what the poet is commenting on from the beginning, whether that is the just the topic of the poem, or whether that is something more deep, something more subtextual. So it might be clear from the start, okay, this is what they're trying to talk about, and here's how I can apply that to my own life. But usually what happens more often is that I have to approach the question from a line to line basis. Okay, what is this line saying? Because maybe the overall idea isn't clear, the overall implication of the poem isn't clear, so I'm going to look at one line, I'm going to look at one stanza. Okay, what is this saying? And then what is this next line saying in relation to the previous line? And as I start to look at the relation of the specific lines and stanzas and sections, then I think a vision starts to come forth. And then from that point, okay, I've got an idea of what the poet is trying to say or what the poet is trying to comment on. Then I can start to look at, okay, what are the conventions of poetry that are being followed or subverted, and how does that influence what the poet is saying? How does that further their message, or how does that just develop the statement that they're making?
One way I approach poetry is that I think about how it functions differently from prose. So one way that poetry is distinctive from prose is that it's as much a visual exercise as it is an auditory exercise. So it's not just how do the words sound, what words are they choosing, but you're asking questions like, where does the line break and why? What is the shape of the poem? How much white space are they using? These are questions that you might ask about a poem that you might not ask about a paragraph from a short story or a novel.
Dreams. All night, the dark buds of dreams open richly. In the center of every petal is a letter, and you imagine.
If you could only remember and string them all together, they would spell the answer. It is a long night.
And not an easy one. You have so many branches, and there are diversions, birds that come and go. The black fox that lies down to sleep beneath you, the moon staring with her bone white eye.
Finally, you have spent all the energy you can, and you drag from the ground the muddy skirt of your roots.
And leap awake with 2 or 3 syllables, like water in your mouth and a sense of loss. A memory, not yet of a word.
Certainly not yet the answer, only how it feels when deep in the tree,
All the locks click open, and the fire surges through the wood, and the blossoms blossom. It's so pretty.
To me, this poem, the structure of it, talks about how dreams are often disjointed. When you first look at this poem, it's almost like you could read any part of the stanza first instead of just the first stanza. And that's often how dreams function, that we can't quite remember the chronological order of them, just that there are bits and pieces. It makes sense as a whole, but not always apart.
If you could only remember and string them all together, they would spell the answer. I love that. Because you never remember your dreams. I mean, if you do remember them, it might be like a really, really great one, or maybe a nightmare. But all the ones in between, you don't ever really remember them.
So when I read this poem, the first thing that stands out to me is the contrast between the dream world, in a sense, and wakefulness. And there's a progression as the subject is moving from the sense of being asleep, interacting with dreams, as almost as if the dream state is the point at which work and creativity is flourishing. You see, it says, finally you have spent all the energy you can, as if dreaming is the way by which we exert energy. It is almost a work, a method of working. And we traditionally think of sleeping and dreaming as being a sense of relief, as being a sense of relaxation and rest and rejuvenation. But here this poses, maybe it's not just rest, maybe it's also a source of work, a source of creativity. But when the person is coming back to reality, they're reawakening, they're reemerging, it says a sense of loss. So this creativity that has kind of been fostered is now lost, but from maybe a single word, from maybe a single idea that is pulled from the sense of dreaming to this sense of reality. And that transition, I think is quite beautiful. And from that transition of an idea or a word being taken from a dream into reality, that's when you see this fulfillment taking place. The fire surging through the wood, the blossoms blossoming, this just emergence of creativity as it transitions from a dream into reality. And I think really the heart of this poem is the idea that our dreams have so much potential, and even though they're vague, even though they're abstract, sometimes just grabbing onto one concept from that has the potential to change reality.
My initial thoughts, especially what sticks out to me, is the last couple stanzas, and just describing what it feels like to wake up from a dream. Like you've been enamored by all of these beautiful sights in your dream, right? And like when you first wake up, you can't really talk about them. You just know how it felt. And kind of the words come later in a dream, like, oh yeah, and then this happened, and then this happened. But usually, like when you very first wake up, it's just a feeling that you kind of have. And so I think, yeah, she does well to talk about like the wistfulness of a dream and how it feels. Really good imagery, some good alliteration, and repetition kind of throughout it.
I don't know. I feel like I would have to read it a couple more times because there's so much going on in it.
Now you just heard some quick, immediate response from people who had never read that poem before. So the things that they were just telling you are their first thoughts after reading the poem. And what I hope that you saw in their different responses were the different things that they highlighted on, the different things that they found interesting or important or engaging. And so what I want you to do when you read this poem is read it through a couple times. Like Ashley said in that last clip, she would need to read through that poem a couple more times before she really knew what she was thinking about it. And I would encourage you to read through this poem 2 or 3 times before you start to try to articulate your thoughts on what's going on in this poem. This poem is rich in imagery and symbolism. And one of the things that really draws me in is the way that the speaker talks about dreams through imagery and how that's attached to our memory of those dreams. This poem is, again, like the poem we talked about in the last video, relies heavily on memory and the unreliable nature of our memory. Think about the dreams that you can remember and think about how long you're able to remember those dreams. It's usually something that fades pretty quickly unless it's one of those reoccurring dreams that comes back and back. And speaking from personal experience, oftentimes when I awake, I have a memory of a dream and it's right there in the front of my mind, but if I don't articulate it to somebody right away, it goes away, and that's probably for the best in most cases. This poem is talking about more than just how long memories of a dream last. So what I want you to think about when you're looking at this poem is, what does this poem say about the importance of dreams? And what different kinds of dreams are being referenced in this poem? I think obviously the speaker is talking about the dreams you have while you're sleeping. But what might this poem have to say about the dreams that you have for your future? Do you see this poem speaking in any way about what you envision for your life past now? So here's the question that I want you to answer in the comments below. What image or symbol in this poem stood out to you the most, and what does it mean to you, and how does it help you understand the poem as a whole? So think about that, comment below on what you found to be the strongest image or the strongest symbol in the poem, and why you liked it, and how it helps you understand the poem as a whole. Okay, that's it for today's video. We'll see you next time. P.S. I'm dreaming of all the foods in the world right now. My wife has me on this cleanse diet. I've had nothing but liquid and these peanut butter square nutrition things that are about half an inch wide, half an inch thick. So yeah, I'm dreaming about all the foods.